All right, welcome in everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. The NBA draft is in the books. A lot of activity around the league coming out of the draft with the sheer number of trades and picks being shuffled around. And I thought, what better time than to bring in our Bulls insider, one of the best in the business, to get some insight and details on the behind the scenes coming out of the draft. Of course, you know him for all his great work in covering the team for over 30 years now, right? It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show Casey Johnson, the Chicago Sports Network. KC, how we doing? Appreciate you making the time, coming on during such a busy time in the NBA.
Yeah, it's been a while, Jamal. Good to see you. I know we've seen each other away from the podcast here and there, but it's good to be back on the podcast. Thank you for having me.
For sure. Now, of course, I'm sure most of you are already, but if you're not, give KC a follow on Twitter at KCJ Hoop. Check out all the great work the team is doing over with their episodes on the Fast Break on YouTube, as well as the By the Horns podcast. I'll leave a link to all that in the description. So, Casey, first and foremost, I think most of us Bulls fans and where our minds are at right now is the kind of player the Bulls are getting with their lottery selection. And Noah, is it Asenge or Aseng? Asenge,
Senge.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
I got to make
Senge.
sure I do the accents properly with it because I've been calling him
Yeah,
Asenge.
yeah.
A player that's a very young, very raw, but a player that projects to have great upside. What can you tell us more about Asenge and how he fits into the Bulls system and what they're trying to build going forward with him?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously I need to preface it by saying I'm not an expert because I've never seen him play live myself. So I'm basing this on uh, stuff that most people base things on, highlights that I've watched, film I've consumed on my own, and then obviously the people that I talk to that know him better. I definitely, around the draft, reach out to people, not just around the Bulls situation, but from other teams. So I try to get at least objective assessment of it. There's a couple of international scouts I've known for a long time. It's really hard to obviously project 18 and a half year olds. I mean, this guy is very young, but I'll just say some things I like about him from what I've seen from people I've talked to is the fact that, it's not the highest level professional league, but the fact that the age of 16, he went and played professionally in a different country against men. And, he didn't wow you with statistics, but he did play and contribute to his team while being a 16-year-old in a professional league. That jumps out. The other thing that jumps out, obviously, is his size. I mean, he's got,
Yeah.
I think he's listed 6'9", but he measured 6'10" at the combine. And got huge reach, standing reach, and his athleticism kind of jumps off the page. So you can project him as one of these 3-and-D guys. Obviously, his shot needs a lot of work, but in terms of being able to run the floor, fit what the Bulls are trying to do, offer some rim protection once he figures out the league and gets stronger. There's some potential there, and there's also some potential for it to go south. So it's the nature of the beast when you draft an 18-year-old.
There were, of course, a lot of players that had been linked to the Bulls, prior to the draft, and players that they were interested in, guys like Colin Murray Boyles, Kamal Malawach, Cedric Howard. Those guys all went right before the Bulls had made their decision. I believe in Mark Eversley's post draft press comments, he mentioned that they were making calls with teams about trading up or down in the draft. I believe he said 3 or 4 teams that they discussed with. I'm curious if you have any insight into which teams those were and which players they were looking at to potentially move up or down.
So I don't have teams, but I can tell you, I said this on our By the Horns podcast. I do know Colin Murray Boyles was very high on their draft board. I mean, we've been writing Colin Murray Boyles' name and Noah Esenge's name for a while, so this shouldn't be a surprise. I heard some late draft week buzz that they were impressed by Yoann Berger,
Mm,
uh, but he went 17, and so obviously they weren't that impressed by him because he was available at 12 and picked Asenge, so he was higher on their board. So those are the three names I was most focused on going into draft night. I don't have this confirmed in terms of independent reporting. This is just my tea leaf reading of the situation. It's pretty educated, though, is my sense is since Mark Eversley admitted that they did make calls to move up, that if they're making calls to move up, they're moving up to try to get Boyles. And if they
yep.
didn't, my educated guess is that the price was too rich. And when Yegor Demon went 8, which was he was a riser, but I don't think many people had him going 8. To me, that started slotting the draft board where the Bulls knew they were going to get somebody that they still liked that was high on their draft board at 12. So they weighed, who's going to be available at 12 versus the price it would take to get up to draft Boyles, who obviously went 9 after Devin. That's my read of the situation. I don't I don't have that progression independently reported, but I do have independently reported that they were high on Colin Murray Boyles, which isn't a surprise. He's been linked to the Bulls for a long time,
Yeah.
and they're very clearly content and happy with their selection of Noah Senge.
Do you think there was ever a situation where they might have looked at Ace Bailey too, trading up? There was, rumors around that. Obviously, kind of a unique situation with what's going on with him right now, and not taking workouts with teams, and even right now, there's speculation whether or not he's actually going to report for the Jazz. Was there any talk about Ace Bailey?
So two names that were a huge draft buzz that I got asked about a lot that I personally never heard linked to the Bulls. That doesn't mean I'm right. I'm just telling you what I heard are Ace Bailey and Derek Queen.
Derek
I
Queen.
did
Okay.
not get any sense ever that the Bulls were into either of those guys. And look, Queen went 13 with the trade
Yeah,
up,
right
right?
after the Bulls. Yeah.
So he was there and they didn't take him. And Bailey, yeah, I didn't hear the Bulls link to him. And my sense is since he went 5, it would have taken a pretty penny. And I mean, you know this as well as anybody, Jamal. The Bulls aren't exactly flush with assets right now. So,
Right, right.
they're not. They haven't been really in a position where they've had a surplus of assets. They actually have a chance for the first time to be in that position. If with this Portland acquisition of Drew Holiday, Portland's obviously thinking that they can push their chips in and make a playoff run. If that happens, that's obviously fortuitous for the Bulls.
Right. I do have to ask, speaking of assets, because there was a lot of chatter going on socials about the Bulls and whether or not they were offered the deal that the Hawks got, who were picking right after them, where they traded down, I think, 10 spots, while also obtaining an unprotected pick in 2026, which, in my opinion, a very bizarre trade on the part of the Pelicans to give up an unprotected pick just to move up 10 spots. Now, I think most people are really quick to assume that, hey, well, clearly the Bulls probably got the same offer and they passed, which I think would have been a mistake. But was there anything that you heard that would suggest the Bulls may have had an opportunity to take advantage of what the Pelicans were looking to do, but instead opted to keep their pick at 12 and get Senge?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that trade to me was the story of draft night. It was
Right.
shocking. I mean, obviously we're very busy on draft night, and given that it went right down right after the Bulls pick, I remember it crossing my phone, and I didn't have time to fully like absorb it and digest it, but it was enough where I was like, wait, what? But then
Right.
I had to dismiss it and focus on the Bulls pick since it had just happened. And then later in the night when I was, absorbing everything from the draft, I was as shocked as anybody. I would just say this about that because I did get that question a lot, and I obviously uh, asked around a little bit myself. I mean, my sense is the Bulls were not offered that, and I mean, if you think about this logically, everyone's like, oh, well, they just assumed because the Bulls were picking one pick before, but the intel. The way I read it is like New Orleans probably had intel that Atlanta was thinking about drafting a big, and so they had to get to 13. I mean, because Atlanta ended up drafting a big at 23 in Asanul, right? So they felt like they knew the Bulls weren't going to take Queen, so they didn't call the Bulls. They called the team that they thought might take Queen, which was my read on it was Atlanta, because since they drafted a big anyway. So again, I never heard the Bulls linked to Queen. That's my sense of what happened. I was told that the offer was not made to the Bulls, so there you go.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the second round pick the Bulls made. They took the Australian big man, Lachman Ulbrich. We'd love to hear your thoughts on him and what he could potentially bring to the Bulls. Because I mean, in my view, right, that's a pick that's probably not going to get much playing time. It sounds like he's going to be on a two-way deal. But just based on some footage that I saw from him, seemed promising. What were your thoughts?
Well, I can tell you my preface on Noah Senge would be tripled down on this kid because I mean the first time I heard his name was the night the Bulls
Same,
acquired
same.
him.
I hadn't
So
heard of his name before
yeah,
either.
so I mean at least the Senge I'd done pre-draft work on. I talked to people about him. I felt like I could talk authoritatively about him even though I haven't seen him live in person. So my introduction to him was the pick or the acquisition, and then diving into highlights. And I actually haven't even talked to anybody about him today. What I can tell you is, like you, I was impressed with his size and athleticism. And look, two-way guys, are important these days. And the fact that the Bulls are immediately, all signs pointing to him eventually signing a two-way contract shows that they have some belief in him. I mean, I was under the impression the Bulls were going to be drafting stashing, but the fact they're drafting him and bringing him over on a two-way is significant. And we all know what the Bulls center situation is with both Vooch and Zach Collins up after next year. And we also know the Bulls lack physicality. They do not
Right.
have a lot of physical players. Zach Collins added a little bit of that when he first came over last year, but he's obviously struggled with foul issues throughout his career. Um, Hopefully, the injury issues that plagued his early part of his career in the past. But I don't think he's a long-term Bull. So never know with a guy like this. I'm intrigued as anybody else.
Did want to ask one more question about the draft, then we can kind of talk about free agency. The trade, right, in the second round as well. The Bulls made a decision to move back 10 spots, making that trade with the Lakers, and getting cash in return to move back to 55. Now, as a fan, while I still think, something like this probably isn't worth getting worked up about because the difference in talent level that late in the draft is probably negligible anyway, but it's still frustrating as a fan where you see a trade being made like that, where you're moving back in the draft and you're not seeing any team benefit, right? Such as acquiring future second round picks or say even doing the opposite, right? Moving up like the Lakers did, trading to get to 35, I think it was where they ended up. In my view, right, it's a pattern we've seen from this franchise where they don't seem to value second round picks. Now, I was hoping maybe you could put a positive spin on this and say, well, maybe they're using that cash to reinvest in, say, player development or something of that nature. Do you know the amount of cash one that was included within the deal that the Bulls maybe received and what maybe the intention was behind that deal?
No, as far as I get the optics, I get it. And it's long been a situation, that's linked to the team, that some fans think that they prioritize cash over, you know, basketball decisions. But I mean, look, here's the way I read that is like they got a player that they still uh, are feel strongly enough about that they're bringing over on a two-way contract. Where I was going into last night's draft, the second night of the draft, thinking that they were either going to trade completely out of the draft
Right.
or a draft and stash guy. That's what Mark Eversley said that they were considering the night before. So I get it, but I'm obviously probably going to be in the minority there. I'm not as worked up about it as some people. Again, the fact that they drafted somebody at 55 that they're going to bring over here is significant to me. And, it's a business and it's run as a business that obviously money is a part of it. I don't know where it's being invested. I don't know the amount. And, like I said, I don't even remember who went at 45. Oh, that other big man from Australia. That's
Was it,
funny. Two Australian bigs
yeah, was it
went
Rocco or
45 and
something? I can't
55.
remember his
Yeah.
name. Yeah. Yeah.
So, obviously, like I said, my expectations were pretty low for the second round, and the fact that they drafted somebody that is going to be in at least Hoffman Estates next year, if not, occasionally at the United Center, is significant to me.
So, did want to get to some discussions on free agency. Obviously, the biggest thing outstanding right now for the Bulls at the time of this recording, anyway, unless we get any breaking news. Josh Giddey, who is set to be a restricted free agent under the new CBA, teams are able to start negotiations with their own free agents, from what I understand. Before free agency officially begins June 30th. I'll be honest, I'm actually surprised we haven't seen the announcement come out yet that the Bulls have given Josh Giddey a new contract. What's the latest you're hearing on your side on how those contract discussions have been going with Josh Giddey and his camp? And do you expect the Bulls to get a deal done before Giddey's able to go out and get offers, or do you actually expect this to take some time and perhaps even turn the scenario where the Bulls let the market dictate his value and have him go out and get an offer sheet before they match it?
I've been saying for a while that all I can tell you about that situation is the team is cognizant of the Patrick Williams situation and how they essentially kind of bid against themselves and proactively sign him to a deal that I maintain to this day. And I know I'm in the minority here. I'm not that hung up on $18 million a year because that's actually for that's salary for like a low level starter in today's rising
Right.
salary cap world. What I didn't love was the 5 years, and I believe there's a player option. Either way, it's 5 years guaranteed. I didn't love the
Yeah.
length of that deal. So I thought that was the issue with that negotiation. And all I can tell you is that the Bulls are, from what I understand, were realized they feel like they got management got the message like we can't do that again. So
Right.
I actually I don't know for sure, but I'm not going to be surprised if this takes a little bit. We've all known for a while that Brooklyn is the only team that projects to have significant salary cap space. I've heard no traction on Giddy to Brooklyn. So why shouldn't the Bulls play hardball? I mean,
Sure.
they can probably, be in the driver's seat throughout the negotiation process while also not alienating him and his representative. That's something you also have to weigh, particularly for someone that all signs that I've pointed to, I've heard, you don't trade Alex Caruso for a guy that you then let walk, number one. Number two, they like the way he finished the season. But from the way I see it, the Bulls are in the driver's seat here. And I think they learned from the Patrick Williams situation that they could be a little bit more, negotiate from a little bit bigger position of strength.
And I know you've mentioned, been following your stuff for a while. I know you mentioned you'd be shocked that if the Bulls do not re-sign Giddey, has that sentiment changed at all, or do you foresee a scenario where potentially Giddey does not come back, whether that be in the form of a sign and trade, or he gets too good of an offer from Brooklyn and they're not willing to match?
The Brooklyn thing, I don't see any scenario that happening. A sign and trade would certainly surprise me, but I always say never in this league, number one. But I'm fully expecting Josh Giddey to be back, whether that's on the qualifying offer or a deal that they both sides find suitable. I can't answer that. I can just emphasize that I get the sense the Bulls are going to operate and negotiate from a position of strength.
What's the latest figure you're hearing on a contract extension? Because I think that's sort of been the big point of contention for a lot of Bulls fans is how much the Bulls should be offering Giddey. What do you think the market's gonna say about him there?
I've not heard a number. I just know that most people are assuming $30 million a year, and I would be surprised if the Bulls proactively offer that. That's all I can say on that.
Okay, okay.
I
So
don't have a number that they are offering, but I can just tell you I'd be surprised if they start at $30 million a year.
got it. Um, so the other guy that's probably going to be talked about a lot this offseason in terms of what the Bulls are going to do with his contract and his future with the team is Kobe White. So he's going into the final year of his 3-year deal. He's far and away outplayed that 3-year contract that he signed back in 2023, I believe, and he's absolutely going to get paid a much larger deal, whether it be in the form of an early extension this offseason or when he becomes an unrestricted free agent in 2026. I think most assume that he won't sign an extension this summer because he can make significantly more as a free agent next summer. And then, of course, it begs the question, do the Bulls look to try and trade him while he has value before potentially losing him for nothing next year? Or do they commit to this backcourt core for the long term with Kobe White included in that? What's the latest you're hearing on Kobe White and his future with the team?
Yeah, I just can tell you, like you, I'd be shocked if Kobe and his representative even entertained the thought of extending this summer just because of how rich his payday projects to be in the offseason of 2026. I can also tell you that all the calls the Bulls received on Kobe at the February trade deadline were mostly rebuffed. They showed no appetite for dealing him at the deadline. I've been talking about potentially needing to get out in front of this situation for a while because I was in the same boat. I
Yeah.
will cost as much, but to me, if you're pointing to 2026 as a summer of having all this flexibility, and Mark Eversley brought it up again the other night. I mean, how if you sign Giddey this summer, are you going to re-sign both Io and Kobe again next summer? So it's certainly a question mark and something I'm going to be monitoring. I can just tell you that everything I've heard right now is the Bulls still value Kobe highly. My sense is they'll try to extend him this summer because it will be cheaper.
Right.
And my sense is that Kobe's camp will say no. So then you make the hard decision of maybe entertaining ideas of trading him, whether that happens now or close to the deadline. I'm going to be monitored like anybody else. I don't have anything definitive other than to say I know for sure that he's valued extremely highly internally, both by the coaching staff and by management.
I'm curious, just your thoughts in general. What do you think Kobe's value would be in the form of a trade? Because I'm also kind of looking at what's going on around the trade market right now. Right, Desmond Bain goes for 4 first-round picks, but then Simons goes to Boston for not that much. So it's kind of hard to navigate right now what the trade market is, the landscape of the trade market in the NBA is right now, and what Kobe White could potentially fetch in a deal. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's to keep in mind there, obviously, and this is just common sense, is like, Simons and Bain make a lot more than Kobe, so
Right,
you
right,
get more back. So, I
right,
mean, that's the other thing that about, trading him now that you're not going to get equal value for him because he makes 13, $14 million, right? So,
right.
he's outplayed that contract, as you mentioned from the jump. So, I don't have any strong sense. I've never heard any concrete offers for him. But I don't think he would fetch 4 first round picks. And I have no problem with Orlando making that move. I was surprised. I think Bain is a perfect fit, and I like that Orlando took a big swing, but I was surprised at four unprotected first round picks, although obviously some of them don't have as much value as others. I don't think Kobe would get that, but he's a good player,
Yeah.
obviously, and he fits for some teams. So yeah, I don't have anything concrete on his trade market because I haven't had to dig into that because there haven't been significant talks. So I don't really know.
Okay. Now, I've got to ask about the Bulls veterans because, well, I do think there's value in having them stay on the roster and mentoring, being vocal leaders for this young roster. You also can't help but think that their time with the franchise is probably coming to an end. I'll start with Vucevic. Feels like every time I've seen you or had you on the channel, we've talked about the Bulls' potential of shipping Vucevic out, but he's still here. Is this finally the offseason where Vuce gets moved? Has he played his last game with the Bulls? Curious what the latest is that you're hearing on the Vucevic trade front.
The Bulls have been open to trading Vooch since February. That was well
Right.
documented. They had talks surrounding him. They're not trading him because they dislike him. They're trading him because, as you mentioned, he doesn't fit kind of the direction of where they're going right now. And I do think, and this is totally my speculation, but I do think there is a sense of the organization also wanting to do right by him a little bit because he's watched them trade off Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and he's like, "Hey, here I am," and he
Right.
admitted that that kind of messed him up a little bit last year. So I think that's again my speculation, but I think there's a small element to that. I have not heard much of a market for him this offseason. I've talked about this on our airwaves before. At the combine, I was told that the Warriors' interest had cooled in him. That can always change, especially if you think you're going to lose Kuminga for nothing, and you want to try to get an asset out of it. Maybe those talks get revisited. I personally, if you asked me to guess, I would guess if Vucevic is moved, it's going to happen in February 2026 instead of this offseason. So that's kind of my vibe on it. I don't know if I'm gonna be right, but that's the sense I have as of you and me talking right now.
Okay. And then how about with Lonzo Ball? Any discussions around him? I think that's the other player, right, that we've been talking about a lot as far as any potential trade interest from teams and things like that. Obviously, on that pretty team friendly contract with play team option on the second year of the deal, so it's a very tradable contract. What's sort of the latest you're hearing there?
Yeah, I mean, I can just tell you that the night that broke in Minnesota, right around the trade deadline, I mean, everybody immediately framed it as this is a tradable deal. So,
Right.
I mean, the resigning happened for multiple reasons. The biggest of which is Ball wanted to give the Bulls like some love and loyalty back and hometown discount back for how they stood by him. And Ball's talked about this publicly. The team physician that performed this, pioneering surgery, Dr. Brian Cole, is obviously not only the Bulls team physician, but he's based in Chicago. And Lonzo and Dr. Cole have formed a very obviously strong relationship. So he wanted to be close to that. So that's why the deal happened. But sure, as soon as it happened, you're like, that's a tradable deal. And I always say is if Lonzo Ball is healthy, he can help all 30 teams in the league just because
Yeah.
he's one of the most selfless players I've ever been around. So I always have my antenna up for a Lonzo Ball trade, and the Bulls have plenty of guards. So if the right deal comes along, yeah, he'll be in a different uniform at some point.
And for Lonzo, it's interesting because I kind of go back and forth on this, right? Where it's like, well, if he is healthy, even if he's not healthy, right? It's good to have him as a
For
presence in the
sure.
locker room, especially for these younger guys. What's from going back to his health real quick? I mean, obviously he didn't play out the end of the season due to injuries. How's he doing right now? Is he fully healthy? Do you know anything about him? Practicing with the other teammates and things like that. Should the Bulls not trade him? Do you think he'll be ready to go by training camp?
Oh, he said all that risk needed was rest. So
Okay.
he's told us he's going to be 100% by training camp. I haven't talked to Lonzo this offseason, so
Yeah.
I don't know his progress. But that was an injury that they opted not to have surgery, and he just basically needed to stop playing and let it calm down. It was a serious injury. Billy Donovan talked about this publicly. It was very close to the same injury that ended Patrick Williams' second season early after I believe 16 games. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, he got lucky that he avoided that, but He's only played 35 games, which sucked for him because obviously he'd been through so much with the knee, and that held
Right.
up in remarkable fashion. So I just want to see Lonzo Ball happy and playing basketball again and being healthy because he deserves it. He's really a joy to be around and so selfless, and
Yeah.
every teammate loves playing with him
Well, he's a fun player to watch, right?
for
Because
sure.
he gives it his all on the court, plays tenacious defense, great court vision. Yeah, he's a fun player to watch. It was disappointing that he wasn't able to close out the season for the Bulls. Um, I'm curious. I was kind of looking back at Mark Eversley's comments, yeah, from his post draft press comments, talking about taking things slow and not wanting to skip steps in building this thing. I am curious though, is there a world where they simply get too good of an offer where they jump on a big name? Say like a Zion Williamson, hell, even a Giannis, even though I know that's a pie in the sky and very, very unlikely, even if it doesn't necessarily fit their overall plan and direction. Could you see something like that happening this offseason? And part of the reason why I ask is because everyone keeps talking about it. The East is more open than it was before, right? Tyrese Halliburton, Jason Tatum, Damian Lillard, they're all not going to play next year. Um, do you see the Bulls potentially pivoting from what Mark Eversley said and actually trying to accelerate things?
I'm not expecting that at all. And Mark Eversley said that like seven different ways that
Yeah.
night. Everything I've heard
Yeah.
internally from the people I talk to is my now look to answer your question, like I mean, you said like if a deal comes along that's too good to be true. I mean, that's every front office's job is
Sure.
to weigh like if something unexpected that is like that Pelicans offer to the Hawks. Like if something like that comes along that like you have to take, yes, maybe you change your plans. Barring that, I've said this many times, like they inherited the roster from John and Gar, and we all expected them to methodically build through the draft and develop Lowry and develop Wendell and develop Kobe. And because that's what Arturis had done. And he came from a front office to do that in Denver. That team
Right.
stayed together.
Right.
And man, they just blew it up. And I was not expecting that. And I know that's
Right.
ancient history. That's almost 4 years ago uh, that the huge summer happened with the Ball, DeRozan, Caruso acquisitions happened, but I was not expecting that roster build, and when that happened, and then they held on to it too long. They've been pretty emphatic and pretty consistent about doing it a different way this time, and the fact they've drafted a 19-year-old and an 18-year-old in back-to-back drafts should tell you all you need to know. I mean, this to me looks like it's going to be a methodical and patient rebuild.
Yeah. And so, to me, it's one of those things where, in a way, admitting a mistake without actually saying, not a mistake necessarily, right? But that, hey, the way we did it about first time, we're going to do it differently. And I always keep going back to as well. Lonzo Ball and him getting injured, that really threw a wrench into everything, right? And that injury, because there was a vision there that I keep harping on my channels. It's like, as much as we like to criticize this front office, and I do think that there is criticism that is due because they hung on to that crew for too long, we have to remember that that really messed up everything. That was the glue guy that really helped that engine run. And you have to give him credit that there was a vision there at that point in time. And now it's about fixing that and trying to build a new vision going forward.
Yeah, and you and I sound like we're in the minority, but I fully agree with that. And look,
Yeah.
where we all also agree is they held on to that core too long. But and the fans are tired of it because it's ancient history. We're not talking, like I said, we're coming up on 4 years, but
Right.
man, that 21-22 team was one of the most fun teams to watch in all my years doing this, that first
Yeah.
half of that season. So, yeah, you do have to give them a little bit of a caveat that looked like a vision that was working. Since then they've made some moves that have definitely been underwhelming and questionable. But the modest pick looks decent. Let's see what this other kid Asenge can do. But yeah, they are obviously a long ways away.
Yeah, for sure.
They have loosely brought up we media's taken what Artur said at the end of the season, modeled it into the Pacers, because he talked about building out a roster of 9 or 10 deep. If you look at that Pacers roster and the Bulls roster, I hope the Bulls' biggest takeaway is how far they are away, because that Pacers roster, first of all, it does have two All Stars, obviously, and then
Right.
second of all, it's just filled with two-way players that are just really, really fun to watch. So
Yeah.
that's going to be the high end vision, and hopefully for Bulls fans that can happen.
I'll get you out of here on this one, Casey. What's your one bold prediction of the offseason that's going to happen for the Bulls?
Yeah, I'm not great on bold predictions. I don't even know if this is bold. I think the Giddy thing's going to be a longer negotiation than people might realize.
Okay, okay. I think that's bold because again, I would have thought it would have already happened by now. So in your view, it's going to go into July.
Um, yes.
Okay, okay. But hopefully he sticks around because otherwise the Bulls got other things they got to solve for right if that happens. But Casey, as always, really appreciate you making the time, especially during such a busy time of year in the off season. Keep up the great work. Best of luck with everything covering this team throughout the summer and going into next season.
Thanks for having me on, Jamal. I appreciate it.